The wind was restless that evening, carrying dust, the scent of dry sagebrush, and a warning that the land was about to break open with thunder. Mara Whitmore stood on the creaking porch of her isolated cabin, one hand on her hip, the other wrapped around a chipped mug of bitter coffee. The late summer sky hung heavy and bruised above the New Mexico plains, smeared with low clouds that crawled in like wolves. Rain was coming, and with it, lightning. She could feel it in her knees, her bones, even her breath. Her father used to say that no good ever came riding in before a storm. He died 2 winters ago, leaving her with this patch of land and no kin to call on. The nearest town was half a day's ride too far for help, too far for comfort. But Mara had made her peace with solitude. She baked her own bread, chopped her own wood, and slept with a rifle beside her bed. In the wild frontier, women survived. By grit, not softness. And yet, on that haunted evening, softness came knocking. At first, she thought it was a mirage trick of the swirling dust and wind. 2 towering figures moved slowly over the rise, dark against the copper light of the dying sun. They walked with the measured, grounded steps of warriors. One limped, blood running down his thigh. The other carried a bow slung across his back. And nothing else, no shirt, no fear, just the gleam of sweat across bronze skin and corded muscle. Apache. She should have run inside. Should have bolted the door, grabbed the rifle, prayed. But she didn't. Instead, Mara stared. Not because they were dangerous, though they certainly were, but because there was something else in their movements. A kind of quiet dignity. They weren't charging or shouting. They weren't looking to take. They were looking to survive. The injured one stumbled again, catching himself on the other's shoulder. Mara could see then that the blood was fresh. A bullet wound, maybe. His chest rose and fell with short, labored breaths. They'd been through something. Fleeing soldiers? A raid gone wrong? She didn't know. Didn't ask. Her body moved before. Her mind could warn her. She stepped off the porch and met them halfway. "You can't stay," she said, her voice tight, her heart thudding like a drum. "But I won't let you die out here." The taller one, the one who hadn't spoken, held her gaze. His eyes were the color of dark pine bark, steady and unreadable. The wind whipped through his long black hair as he finally nodded once. A silent agreement. No words. No threat. Together they helped the wounded one into the cabin. Inside, the fire was already burning low in the hearth, casting flickering gold across rough-hewn wood walls. The moment the door shut behind them, the cabin felt impossibly small. Too much man, too much heat. The men didn't speak English, not at first. Mara pointed at a chair near the fire, and they gently lowered the bleeding one into it. She fetched water, clean rags, and the strongest whiskey she had left as she tended. The wound, she tried not to look at their bodies. But how could she not? Both men were shirtless, probably had been traveling like that for days in the heat. Their chests were carved with scars, old and new, each telling a story she would never be bold enough to ask. They bore the marks of warriors, survivors, men, who had endured more than she could imagine. She cleaned the bullet wound with firm hands, whispering soft nothings as the man clenched his jaw. The taller one stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin on her back. He didn't speak, didn't move, but his presence filled the room like thunderclouds. Protective, watchful, she finally bandaged the wound and stepped back, her palms trembling. "I'll give you the night," she said, looking between them. "One night, no more." The words felt foolish even as she spoke them, like tossing a net over a river and hoping it would hold. One night with men like this, strangers, yes, but powerful and mysterious, wasn't going to be enough. She felt it in her bones, same as she'd felt the storm. The rain came in waves that night, hammering the roof and windows, but inside the cabin, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Mara didn't know it then, But the moment she opened her door to those two Apache giants, she had opened more than just her home. She had opened her fate. The storm deepened as night fell, turning the world outside into a blur of silver rain and rolling thunder. But inside Mara's cabin, the real storm was just beginning, quiet, slow building, and far more dangerous. The fire crackled low, casting a warm, golden flicker across the three of them. Mara sat at the edge of her stool, drying her hands, her eyes darting between the two Apache warriors now occupying her home. The injured one, broad and dark-eyed, was dozing lightly in her father's old chair, his head tilted back, lips parted. In pain. She'd wrapped his wound tightly, but the blood still soaked faintly through the cloth. His breathing, though shallow, had steadied. She didn't know his name yet. That unsettled her more than anything. The other one, the silent shadow who hadn't left his side, stood by the window like a sentry. Tall, bare-chested, with hair that fell past his shoulders in thick black waves. He hadn't said a word since entering the cabin. But his eyes missed nothing, not the flicker of her nervous fingers, not the way she reached instinctively for her rifle, nor the way she kept glancing at him like he was something too wild to name. "Will he live?" Mara asked softly. The standing man finally turned toward her. His voice was deep, rough-edged like stone scraping over stone. "He is strong. He will heal." His accent was thick, his English measured but clear. She nodded. "I can keep the wound clean. But if the bullet's still in, I took it out before we came here." He interrupted Dot, so he was the one who had done the field surgery. She looked at his hands, calloused, stained with dried blood. This man wasn't just a warrior. He was a protector. "You have a name?" she asked, needing something to make this real. Something to make them less like ghosts and more like men. He hesitated. "Talon," he said finally, then added, "His name is Koa." Talon, like the claw of an eagle. It fit him. Mara nodded slowly. "I'm Mara." Talon's eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. Not in a leering way, he didn't look at her the way some white men had in town, with hunger and disrespect. No, his gaze was heavier, curious, as if he were trying to figure out why a settler woman had opened her door to two men most folks would have shot on sight. "You are not afraid," he said. "I was," she replied honestly. "Still am. But fear doesn't feed a man, doesn't stop blood." He studied her. "You are alone?" Mara hesitated, her stomach tightening. That was the kind of question that could mean anything. He could be assessing whether she had someone nearby, whether someone would miss her, whether she was easy to take. But there was no malice in his voice, just an observation, a recognition. "Yes," she said finally, "just me." Talon gave a single nod, then returned to his silent vigil. The room settled into a tense quiet. Rain battered the roof. Lightning flashed outside, and Mara shivered despite the fire. She rose and moved to her small pantry, pulling down a jar of preserved stew potatoes, rabbit, a few carrots from her late summer garden. She'd been saving it for winter, but she couldn't let them starve. She warmed the stew over the fire and spooned it into 3 bowls. When she handed one to Talon, their fingers brushed. A shock went through her like stepping too close to a lightning strike. His hand was rough and warm. He held her gaze for a heartbeat before sitting down across from her. They ate in near silence. Koa roused briefly to eat, then fell back into sleep. The stew bowl still cradled in his lap. As Mara cleaned up, she noticed Talon watching her. Not just her body, but the way she moved, cautious, deliberate, tired. The way a woman moves when she's used to doing everything alone. "You have a strong heart," he said quietly. She turned, unsure how to answer that. "You let strangers into your home. You tend our wounds. You don't ask why we ran." "I figured I didn't want to know," she replied, managing a half smile. Talon stepped closer. Close enough that she could see a faint scar across his collarbone and the way the firelight kissed the curve of his chest. He towered over her. Every inch of him was strength. "You should be afraid of men like us," he said. Mara swallowed hard. "Maybe, but I'm not." Thunder cracked overhead, and she took a step toward him. "One night," she whispered. "That's all this can be." But her voice betrayed her. It trembled not with fear, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. By midnight, the storm had turned the desert into a violent sea of wind and water. Rain hammered the cabin roof like war drums, and the old chimney coughed smoke every time lightning split the sky. But Mara wasn't thinking about the storm anymore. Her thoughts were full of Talon and Koa, two shirtless Apache warriors she never imagined would set foot inside her home, much less sleep beneath her roof. Koa lay on the cot by the fire, bandages now clean and tight, his bare chest rising and falling more steadily. He hadn't spoken much, just a groan here and there as his body fought fever. Mara had tucked one of her quilts over him earlier, but he kicked it off in his sleep. The firelight shimmered across his skin, highlighting the lines of a man built by war and weather, not comfort. Talon had not sat once. He remained at the window, watching, always watching. Even shirtless, with nothing but old pants and worn moccasins, he looked more like a sentinel carved out of stone than a man. Mara wondered if he ever slept, or if he even trusted her fully. She didn't blame him. If the situation were reversed, she wouldn't have trusted a settler either. Still, the silence between them had grown. Softer, less like the edge of a blade and more like the quiet that comes before a question, a kind of waiting. Mara had lived alone long enough to recognize it. She stirred the fire, then finally asked, "You haven't told me why you're really out here." Talon didn't turn. His voice came low and even. "You said you didn't want to know. I changed my mind." A long pause stretched between them. Then, soldiers came to our village at first light yesterday, looking for someone. Accused my brother of theft. He refused to bow. Words turned to bullets. Mara's breath caught. Did he? He killed one. Took a bullet himself. We ran before they brought more. She sat back slowly, staring at the fire. So they'll come looking for you. Yes, she closed her eyes. Her cabin wasn't far from Fort Dunley. If soldiers followed the trail, it wouldn't take long. To find them, she could lie. Say they passed through, forced their way in. Say she was threatened, but she'd be lying to men in blue coats, men who had mocked her in the market when she tried to buy grain without her father, who had laughed behind her back and said a settler girl alone was nothing but wild meat. Men who already saw the Apache as savages and her as barely better. I won't turn you in, she said firmly, even if they come. This time, Talon turned toward her. Why? She looked up, meeting his eyes. Because I don't believe you're the monsters they say you are. And because I've been alone a long time. And you're the first men who haven't made me feel small. Talon didn't speak right away. He took a step closer. Then another. The smell of smoke and blood and rain clung to his skin. Mara tilted, her head back to look up at him, his bare chest just inches away, muscles tight beneath old scars, his throat working as he swallowed something back. Emotion, restraint. He reached up and touched her cheek with the back of his knuckles. Just once, gently, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. You are not small, he said softly. You are brave and rare. Mara closed her eyes at the sound of his voice, raw and reverent. She didn't know how it happened next. Whether it was her hand reaching for his or his mouth finding hers first. But suddenly they were close, too close, her lips pressed to his breath hot and shaky against her skin. It wasn't a kiss born of lust. Not entirely. It was something deeper. A release of fear. a recognition of loneliness, a collision of two souls who didn't trust easily but had found each other in the storm. When they parted, they didn't say anything. Words would have cheapened it. She reached for a second blanket and handed it to him. You should sleep. I will not sleep while my brother is hurt. Mara placed a hand on his forearm. Then sit, rest, watch him. But don't burn yourself out. He nodded slowly and took the stool beside the fire. She left him there shirtless, scarred, and silent, guarding his brother like a wolf guards its wounded dot as Mara slipped into her narrow bed on the far side of the cabin. She listened to the thunder, the fire crackling, and the slow, steady breathing of two men who didn't belong in her world, but somehow fit perfectly inside her home. And, against all reason, inside her heart. By morning, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, a gray mist stretching out across the hills like a shroud. The earth was damp and quiet, save for the drip of water from the eaves and the distant call of a hawk cutting through the mist. Inside the cabin, Mara stirred first. She sat up slowly in her small bed, wrapped in a worn wool blanket, unsure if the strange, electric events of the night before had been real or simply something she dreamed up in the warmth of the fire and the pressure of loneliness. But then she saw him, Talon, still shirtless, still awake, sitting in the same chair near the hearth where he'd been all night, one arm resting across his thigh, the other curled protectively across his lap, a knife lying untouched on the floor at his feet. His eyes were open, but he hadn't noticed her yet. He was watching Koa, who slept more peacefully now, the fever seemingly broken. Mara stood, stretching, brushing her tangled hair from her face. She crossed the room slowly, the wood creaking under her bare feet. You didn't sleep, she said. Talon's eyes flicked to hers. I watched. His voice was rough from disuse, and there was something softer in his tone this time. Less guarded, more human. She looked down at Koa. His chest moved steadily. His skin was no longer flushed with fever, but instead smooth and calm. The worst had passed. Mara knelt beside Talon and reached for the folded blanket. Without asking, she lifted it and gently draped it over his shoulders. His muscles tensed at first, then slowly relaxed under her touch. You should rest now, she murmured. I rest when he is safe, he replied. You don't have to carry the whole world on your back alone. Talon looked down at her hand, still resting on his shoulder. There is no one else. Mara knew that feeling too well. Without thinking, she brushed a stray strand of hair from his face. His skin was warm beneath her fingers. He didn't pull away, didn't flinch. For a moment, the warrior disappeared, and she saw only the man beneath the scars. You have strong hands, she whispered, almost to herself. Hands that could kill a man. He looked at her carefully. They have. I believe that. She didn't say it with judgment, only honesty. Then she reached for his hand and held it in hers. But I think they could comfort a woman, too, she added, voice quieter now. Talon swallowed, his jaw tightening. He glanced toward his brother, then back to her. You do not fear me. I do, she admitted, her thumb gently brushing across the lines of his palm. But not the way you think. He stood slowly, rising above her like a storm cloud again, broad, powerful, steady. Mara didn't move, didn't shrink back. He extended his hand to help her stand. She took it. It swallowed hers whole. Their eyes locked. Why did you let us in? He asked. Truly. Mara blinked, unsure how to explain the ache that had lived in her chest since her father died. The long nights where silence pressed in too hard. The hunger that wasn't for food, but for someone to look at her and see her. I don't know, she said truthfully. I saw your brother bleeding. I saw you carrying him like he was your own life. I saw that you were men who'd been hunted, not monsters looking to hurt me. He stepped closer. And maybe, she added, quieter now, Maybe I was tired of pretending I didn't need someone too. Talon's fingers came to rest on her cheek again, not demanding. Just there, gentle, steady. They stood there for a long while, the fire crackling behind them, the scent of wet earth seeping in through the walls. Then a noise soft, rough broke the moment. Koa groaned and stirred. Mara moved to his side, her healer's instincts kicking in. She offered water from the tin cup, wiped the sweat from his brow. He looked at her, recognition finally returning to his fever-glazed eyes. You, he said, voice weak but clear. She saved your life, Talon told him in Apache. She fed us, sheltered us. Koa's gaze lingered on her face. He managed a slow, pained nod of respect. Mara smiled faintly. You're not dying today, warrior. Koa's lips curved into something like a grin. Pity. Talon chuckled, a rare, low sound that warmed the air. In that small cabin, with blood drying on the floor and smoke curling in the hearth, something unspoken settled between the three of them. It wasn't love yet. But it wasn't nothing either. And Mara knew, deep in her bones, that what began as survival was becoming something far more dangerous. By the time the storm passed and the sky began to clear, the air around the cabin felt different, charged, as if lightning had left behind something electric in its wake. But the real tension wasn't in the sky, it was in the cabin. The rain stopped, but Mara's heart didn't. Not when she caught the way Talon's eyes lingered on her as she prepared food. Not when Koa, still weak but recovering, grunted with irritation that he needed help standing, but accepted it only from her. The brothers hadn't spoken much to each other, or to her, but their silences were rich with meaning. There was unspoken understanding between the men, like they'd already had a wordless conversation she hadn't been part of, a pact. And Mara didn't know what to make of the way both of them looked at her now. She felt it in every breath she took. In every glance that lasted just a second too long. They weren't just grateful. They wanted her, and what was worse, she didn't want to stop them. She served them a stew of wild onion, potato, and dried jerky from the cellar. They ate around the fire in the center of the cabin, seated on worn blankets and crates. Koa managed a few quiet bites before leaning back against the wall, satisfied. Talon, as always, remained quiet, but his eyes never left her. Mara tried to keep busy, pretending not to notice. She gathered the dishes, crouched beside the fire to scrub them clean, then wiped her hands on her apron. When she looked up again, Talon was still watching her. Not just watching, studying. Do I have something on my face? She asked, her voice breaking the quiet. No, he said, his voice low. Just trying to understand. Understand what? Why a settler woman would let two Apache men stay under her roof without fear, and why she looks at both of them like that. Mara flushed. Like what? Like she belongs to neither, but might belong to both. Koa chuckled from the corner, his strength slowly returning. He's not wrong, he muttered, switching to English. We're used to hatred, not hunger. Mara stood, her pulse pounding. I'm not looking for trouble. Talon stood too, slowly, carefully. Then what are you looking for? She met his gaze. I don't know. I was only supposed to survive this season, make it through winter. I didn't expect. Her eyes flicked to Koa, then back to Talon. I didn't expect you. You expected death, Talon said quietly. Not desire. The fire cracked between them. Koa spoke again, voice rough with amusement. You gave us shelter. You gave us healing. You've seen us at our weakest, and you're still here. Mara's throat was tight. I don't want to be owned. Talon stepped closer, his bare chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. We do not take what is not freely offered. I'm not offering anything, she whispered. His hand brushed her cheek. Then why do you tremble when I touch you? She closed her eyes. Because I've never felt safe and wanted. At the same time, and there it was. The truth. Naked in the air between them, the firelight flickered, casting shadows across their skin. Koa sat quietly, watching, but not with jealousy, not with anger, just presence. Like he, too, was waiting for Mara to decide, she looked from Talon to Koa, and something in her chest broke open. She couldn't explain it, not with words, but she stepped forward. Not toward one, toward both. I don't want one night, she said. But that's all I promised. Talon's brow furrowed. And if you changed your promise? She looked into his eyes, then over at Koa, who nodded solemnly. Then we would stay, Koa said, if that's what you wanted. She exhaled slowly. I want to feel what this is. I want to stop being afraid. Talon's hand slid gently down her arm. Then let the fear die tonight. They sat together near the fire after that, her between them, their warmth surrounding her, neither pushing nor claiming. Just there, present, open, shirtless and scarred and strong and more tender than any men she'd ever known. That night, as the stars emerged from behind the clouds, Mara didn't lie alone in her bed. She lay between two warriors who had offered her nothing but honesty and protection. And though no vows had been spoken yet, something sacred passed between them all. They were no longer strangers, and this was no longer just one night. The fire had died down to glowing embers by the time Mara stirred beneath the thin wool blanket. Warmth pressed against both sides of her, Koa on one side, his breath even and steady, and Talon on the other, his arm slung lightly across her waist, the weight of it grounding. For a moment, she just lay there, listening to the wind brush softly against the cabin walls. The world hushed and wrapped in a kind of sacred silence. She had never shared her bed with a man before, let alone two. And yet, there was no shame, no regret, only the thudding beat of her heart, steady and calm, as if her body had finally found where it belonged. The night before had unfolded slowly, like a dance none of them had ever practiced, but somehow knew instinctively. There had been no rush, no desperation, only touch and trust. Talon had kissed her first, but with reverence, not conquest. His lips had brushed hers like a vow, not a demand. And when Koa had reached for her hand, she had taken it without hesitation. Between them, she had not felt torn but held. One was quiet thunder, the other deep earth. And she was the storm they both surrendered to. Now, in the first gray light of morning, reality began to creep in. Mara slowly untangled herself and rose from the bed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She padded barefoot across the creaky floorboards to stoke the fire, careful not to wake the men. Their breathing was rhythmic and deep, exhausted from more than just passion, from the long, brutal journey that had brought them to her doorstep. As the flames licked back to life, she glanced out the window. HOOFPRINTS. They hadn't been there yesterday. And they weren't hers. Her stomach twisted. Soldiers. An hour later, Talon was awake and sharpening his knife in the doorway. His hair was wet from where he'd stepped outside to wash in the rain barrel, and his bare chest still glistened faintly in the morning light. His eyes flicked up as she approached. They're close, Mara said. I know, he replied calmly. I saw the prince too. Koa's still too weak to run. Talon didn't answer at first, just kept sharpening. Finally, he said, then we don't run. Mara knelt beside him, her hand on his knee. If they come and find you here, they'll kill us both, he finished, voice low. Maybe you too. I can lie, she whispered. Say you passed through. Say I turned you away. No, his eyes met hers. You already chose us. Don't take that back now. Mara looked away, conflicted. Her heart wanted to protect them. Her body still ached with the memory of their closeness, but her mind screamed warnings about how the world worked, how settlers and soldiers viewed Apache men, and how mercy was rarely extended to those who didn't look like them. Koa stirred on the bed, groaning slightly. He was stronger than yesterday, but not strong enough to fight. Not against rifles. Talon's hand touched Mura's face, drawing her back to the present. "We'll hide," he said, "if they come. But if they threaten you, you say whatever you must to survive." "I won't betray you," she said, jaw tight. "Then we all die." His words were not cruel. Just true. Later that morning, the sound of hooves cracked through the still air like gunfire. Mara stood alone on her porch, arms crossed, rifle tucked behind the door just in case. Talon and Koa were beneath the floorboards where she'd hastily covered them with old sacks, pots, and a rug. Not perfect, but it would have to do. 3 soldiers rode up, their coats dusty, eyes hard. "Ma'am," the lead one said, "we're tracking 2 Apache men dangerous. You see anything unusual yesterday?" Mara didn't flinch. She knew what he saw: a woman alone, vulnerable, probably desperate for conversation or a man's protection. But her spine stayed straight. No. She lied steady. Just the storm. "They're armed," another soldier said. "One might be wounded. You didn't hear anything?" "Just thunder and rain." He narrowed his eyes. "You sure?" Mara smiled faintly. "I've got nothing to hide, sir." After a tense silence, the captain nodded. "If you see anything at all, you send word to Fort Dunley. Immediately." "I will." They rode off, their silhouettes shrinking into the morning haze. Only when they were gone did she exhale. She went inside, lifted the floorboards, and stared down at the 2 men waiting in silence. "They're gone," she said. Talon climbed out first, his face unreadable. "You could have given us up." "I didn't." Koa sat up slowly, looking between them. "She's already one of us now." Mara smiled, then surprised herself by saying what had already started to feel true. "I don't want to survive alone anymore." The air that evening held a different weight, heavier, more certain. The storm had passed, the soldiers were gone, and Mara knew the moment had come to decide. Would she return to the quiet life of survival and isolation, or step into the unknown with 2 men who had changed everything? She sat on the front porch with her legs tucked beneath her, staring at the fading colors of dusk. Orange bled into violet over the distant ridges. She could smell the soft smoke of the fire drifting from inside and hear Koa's quiet breathing as he slept out behind her. Talon moved quietly in the cabin. Even his footsteps were thoughtful. He walked like a man used to being hunted, but also like someone who never wanted to disturb what was fragile. She wondered if he realized that applied to her, too. When he stepped outside, shirtless, arms crossed, leaning against the post beside her, Mara felt the same pulse of heat she'd felt since the moment he arrived. But it wasn't just lust anymore, it was loyalty, familiarity, something close to belonging. "You did not have to lie for us," he said. "I didn't lie," she replied softly. "I protected my home." Talon looked out toward the horizon. "We can leave by morning." "Koa can ride now." Slowly. "And go where?" she asked. "Far enough not to be hunted," Mara swallowed. "And leave me behind?" He didn't answer right away, but his voice was rough when he finally spoke. "You don't belong in our world." She turned to face him fully now. "No. But you didn't belong in mine, and still you came." He stared at her then, long and deep. The kind of look that doesn't ask permission. The kind that claims, "We do not take women without their choice," he said. "You know this." "I know," she whispered. "I also know that when I opened my door that night, I made one." Talon stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. He knelt in front of her, knees to the wooden porch boards, and reached for her hand. His rough fingers wrapped gently around hers. "You saved my brother. You risked your life. And you gave us shelter when no one else would." He looked up at her with eyes that no longer held suspicion, but something stronger. "Reverence. We would honor you as our woman," he said quietly. "Not for one night, for all seasons." Mara's throat tightened. "You're saying both of you?" "Yes," Talon said. "You feel it. You know it. We are not jealous of each other. We do not fight over you. We fight for you." Mara stood slowly, pulling him to his feet. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were steady. "I don't want to be owned." "You won't be," came another voice from behind them. Koa, shirtless and bandaged but upright, leaned in the doorway. The fire behind him glowed, painting his chest and the scars across it in gold. He looked at her like a man seeing his home for the first time. "You'd be chosen," he said, "by two warriors who would guard your body, your land, and your heart, and you would choose us back. That is the only way this works." Mara blinked, heart slamming against her ribs. "You're serious," she whispered. "As the sky," Talon said. "As blood?" Koa added. Mara stepped back inside, walking between them. They didn't follow, just watched. She stared at her home, the carved mantel her father built, the cooking pot she stirred every night, the simple tools on the shelf. It had always been hers. A place to fight off the world. But now, with them inside it, it felt like something new. She turned to face them. Her voice was quiet but unshakable. "Then I choose." Koa straightened. Talon's hands clenched at his sides. "I choose you," she said. "Both of you. Not just for one night, but until they bury us under this land." Silence. Then movement. Talon crossed the room first, wrapped his arms around her, pressed his forehead to hers like a promise. Koa followed, slow but steady, placing his hand over hers. No vows. No ceremony. Just breath, touch, and the fierce recognition that their lives were now tied. Mara had made her choice, and in doing so, she had claimed them back. The next morning broke crisp and clean, cloudless, with the air sharp and sweet after the storm. Birds returned to the trees around the cabin, chirping as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed. Inside, the small cabin no longer felt like a hollow shelter. It felt lived in, claimed, a place where three souls had silently woven themselves together in a night that had erased lines Mara never thought she'd cross. She woke between Talon and Koa, both still asleep. Talon lay on his side, a protective hand resting lightly on her hip. Koa, still healing but stronger each day, lay flat, his bare chest rising and falling steadily. She traced the curve of his collarbone with her eyes, then looked back at Talon. It should have felt wrong, crowded, too much, but instead it felt peaceful. Safe. And for the first time in over a year, she didn't wake up bracing for loneliness. By mid-morning, they'd all risen. Talon had gone to the woods to check the perimeter. Koa insisted on helping Mara tend to the small garden behind the cabin, though she noticed he leaned heavily on the hoe. "You don't have to prove anything," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. He looked at her, sweat already glistening across his chest. "You chose us. I earned that." She smiled softly. "You already did." A rustling sound from the trees snapped her attention toward the forest. Her hand went to the rifle leaning against the back wall of the cabin. Talon emerged. A moment later, but he wasn't alone. A man Apache, older, with streaks of silver in his braid, walked behind him, not armed, but alert. His face was weathered like old bark. His sharp eyes studied the cabin, the crops, and finally Mara. Talon said simply, "He's our uncle. He followed us north to see if we survived." Koa straightened up slowly. "Uncle Roka," he said, respectfully. Mara wiped her hands on her apron. Should I make coffee? The old man raised a brow. You're the settler woman they talk about? That depends who's talking, she said. He chuckled dryly, then looked at Talon and Koa. You're still hunted. You brought danger. To her door. I knew what I was doing, Mara said. And they didn't bring danger. I've had plenty of that on my own. Roka turned to Talon. She speaks strong, like our grandmother. Talon nodded. She is strong? She didn't. Just offer us shelter. She stood for us when the soldiers came. Roka narrowed his eyes. You stayed here? We stay here still, Koa said. The old man stepped toward Mara then, just close enough to lower his voice. Do you know what it means to bind yourself to men like them? I do, she said, lifting her chin. You'll be hunted, watched, feared by your people and never accepted by ours. I've lived a life of being watched, feared, and never accepted, she said. But I've never been loved like this. So I'm not afraid of what comes next. The old man didn't speak for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. Then you'll need allies. The soldiers will come again. Mara exchanged a glance. With Talon, do you think they'll search here? They'll come back, Talon said. Maybe not today, maybe not this week. But they will. Men like that don't like losing face. We'll be ready, Mara said, squaring her shoulders. Koa limped forward. If they bring fire, we give them smoke. If they bring threats, we give them silence, but we don't run anymore. Mara could feel it now, what had changed. Before, she'd only tried to survive each season, each storm, each day. But now, for the first time, she was standing with people. People who would stand back. That night, they set a fire outside instead of in. Roka stayed and told stories of their ancestors while the stars wheeled overhead. Mara leaned against Talon's shoulder as Koa played softly on a carved flute. The sound floated into the hills, haunting and beautiful. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe soldiers. Maybe whispers from passing traders. Maybe the cold bite of judgment from people who'd never understand. But she did know this. She had chosen love over safety, and if danger was coming, they'd face it together. The fire came not from their hearth, but from the distant ridge-orange smoke curling against the blue morning sky, too high to be from any normal camp. Mara was the first to see it, out with a pail of water when the wind shifted and carried the scent of ash down into the valley. She froze. Her breath hitched. Not a wildfire, a warning. Someone had lit a signal. Within seconds, Talon was at her side. Shirtless, bow strapped across his back, eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. Koa followed behind, slower due to his healing wound, but just as tense. Apache signal? Mara asked. Talon's jaw clenched. No, army flare. They're trying to smoke us out without firing a shot. Koa muttered something in his language under his breath. It didn't sound hopeful. Why now? Mara whispered. It's only been a few days. They never meant to let it go, Talon said. They backed down when you stood tall, but they see us as a stain. A blemish they didn't clean up. And now they're coming to finish what they started, Koa added grimly. By midday, the smoke had thickened. No soldiers had arrived yet, but the ominous scent of threat lingered in every breath they took. Roka, their uncle, had left at dawn, promising to return with more eyes from the north. Just in case, he'd said. But Mara knew it wasn't just in case. It was because he expected blood. Mara gathered what she could. Food stores, her rifle, spare water, and the old hunting knife her father had once used to gut a cougar that got too close to the sheep. She strapped it to her leg with a strip of leather inside. Talon laid out a map of the valley floor. They'll likely come in from the pass. That's where the soldiers feel strongest. It's open, clean, lets them move horses without fear of ambush. We can cut the trail, Koa said. Lay spikes, scatter rocks, force them off course. Mara looked between them. And then what? You hold them off alone while I hide in the root cellar like a ghost? Talon gave her a hard stare. You've done enough, Mara. No, she said firmly. I've only just begun. By sundown, the plan was set. Mara would not flee. She would not hide. The three of them, settler woman, shirtless warrior, wounded brother, would face the threat side by side. They took positions by the edge of the tree line near the open field, where the soldiers would pass. Koa, despite his injury, carried a long spear and crouched low among the brush. Talon stood silent on a boulder above, bow drawn, eyes scanning every shadow. Mara, rifle cocked, stood behind a small barrier they'd built from fallen logs and rock, her heart hammering like a drum in her throat. They waited, and waited. Then dash movement. A glint of metal. The quiet snort of a horse. 6 riders in uniform. Guns strapped. Faces drawn tight. One of them she recognized from before, the one who tried to search the cabin and questioned her about harboring fugitives. Mara's fingers curled tighter around the stock of her rifle. Wait. Talon whispered above. The men dismounted slowly. The lead rider pulled a paper from his coat and read something aloud too far away to hear, but clearly meant as a declaration. Then he burned it on a branch and let the ashes fall. Koa grunted. They're here to make an example. Them men spread out. 2 stayed near the horses. 2 crept closer to the tree line. Mara's breath caught. One false move and it would all begin. But then a sharp bird call sounded from the north. Talon straightened. A moment later, Roka stepped from the trees, flanked by 3 Apache riders behind him, bows drawn, arrows notched, faces painted with war colors. The soldiers froze. I believe you are lost, Roka said, his voice like gravel. This is government land. The officer replied. And those men you're protecting are fugitives. No, Roka said. They are family. And this woman? She is no criminal. She is our kin now. The tension grew so thick Mara felt it in her teeth. You have no jurisdiction here, Roka continued. Turn back. Or the valley burns for. Real. The officer hesitated, looked at his men. Then at the Apaches on the ridge. Then at Mara, who stood tall and unflinching with a rifle aimed straight at his chest. He spat on the ground. We'll be back. Good, Talon growled from the boulder above. We'll be waiting. The soldiers retreated. No one cheered. No one lowered their weapons for several minutes. But when Mara finally exhaled and felt Koa's warm hand press into hers, and Talon dropped beside her from the rock above, she realized something. They were no longer just surviving danger. They were meeting it head-on as a family. A week passed. The soldiers did not return. The smoke signs vanished, the skies cleared, and the valley breathed again. But inside Mara, something had shifted forever. She was no longer waiting for life to reclaim what it gave. She was no longer hiding from fate. She had chosen her path and the 2 shirtless Apache warriors who now worked beside her each day, not as guests or fugitives, but as equals. Talon helped repair the barn's roof, his muscled back glinting in the sun as he hammered and tightened. Planks. Koa, though still limping, had begun whittling tools, singing softly in his native tongue as birds watched from the fence posts. Mara stood by the doorway of the cabin one morning, a soft breeze tugging at her apron, the scent of bread cooling. Behind her, she watched them, strong, scarred, gentle in ways the world never expected. One night had changed everything. She smiled to herself, and she hadn't asked them to stay. They'd stayed because she did. Later that evening, as the 3 of them sat around the fire pit behind the cabin, no longer hidden inside Roka, returned. He wore no war paint now, just a worn leather vest and a look of quiet respect. He sat beside Mara and handed her something wrapped in hide. She unwrapped it slowly. It was a beaded sash Apache made, with patterns she didn't recognize. It belonged to my sister, Roka said. She married a white man. Your strength reminds me of hers. Mara's fingers traced the beads. Did people accept her? They tried not to, he said. But they failed. Talon reached over and gently pulled the sash around her waist. Then they'll fail with you too. She looked between them. These men who had once been strangers in her doorway, barely alive, now defending her land, fixing her fence, calling her their woman. I don't want to run anymore, she whispered. I want to plant roots. With you both. You already did, Koa said, his hand resting over hers. That spring, word traveled slowly. Travelers stopped by the cabin. Most left with fresh water, bread, and whispers of the woman who lived with 2 Apache giants, how she dared to love them both, openly and without apology. Some called her wild, some called her ruined, but others quiet women, hardened by loss. Or loneliness came to her for seeds, for stories, for shelter. She shared what she had, but more than that, she offered proof that a woman didn't have to choose what the world expected of her. That love could be brave, not just soft, and that, sometimes, just one night is all it takes to rewrite a life. 1 year later, the cabin had grown. A second room now stretched off the back, built by Talon and Koa's hands. A small chicken coop sat near the garden, and Mara's herb patches overflowed with color. Inside, laughter rang out a child's voice. Their daughter, Lena, ran barefoot across the dirt floor, chasing after a carved wooden horse. Koa scooped her up in his arms and lifted her high above his head, her giggles filling the air. Talon watched from the doorway, bow slung across his back. His smile small but proud. Mara stood over the hearth, one hand on her belly round again. With life, she looked out at her family. Her choice. Her home, she had given them a night. They had given her forever.